Hello, I'm Rudabeh Shahbazi, and welcome back to another roundtable discussion taking a look at the conflict in Iran. The resistance movement that's led up to this conflict is a major effort from all walks of life, not exclusively led by women. But today we are taking a look at it through the lens of women who have been fighting for their rights for decades. Joining me now is Dr. Benjamin Radd. He is a political scientist and senior fellow with the UCLA Burkle Center for International Relations. Pattie Ehsaei is an author, activist, and content creator. And Parmis Khatibi is the chairwoman of Serve Iran. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for being here. So let's start with looking at this through the lens of women. You know, there is a lot of kind of backlash when it's approached like that, saying, you know, this isn't the women life freedom movement anymore. We need to move on beyond that. Does this undermine the greater cause of regime change when we focus on looking at it through the lens of women?
I don't think so. I think it's really important to look at it through the lens of women because we typically are not given an opportunity to speak our minds, especially when it comes to politics. That is a status that's held typically for men. So I think it's really refreshing to get a different perspective, especially from women who are activists, who care about what's happening in Iran, and Iranian women.
Absolutely, especially when I think women their whole lives in Iran have had to fight to show why their relevance is there for every single inch, whether it's and not being suppressed for what's going on with them in Iran, and also saying and having a voice and making sure that voice matters.
But what do you think?
It was overdue. I mean, we saw the Shah in 1963 had his White Revolution program, which was a multi-point program that was meant to elevate the status of women in society. It brought them into the workforce, it expanded literacy, brought them out of the home and a part of the Iranian economy. And it went a long way towards bringing not just modernity, but modernity for women. And I think that there is a legacy and a tradition of that needs to continue, that was put aside after the Islamic Revolution, and I think that what we're seeing is a reanimation, a reemergence of that movement, and its time is well overdue.
Well, let's talk about returning to a monarchy. I mean, that is causing a divide within the diaspora. I think a lot of people in Southern California are monarchists. We've seen them hit the streets. We've seen people on the streets of Iran chanting for Reza Pahlavi. What do you both think? Pattie, I know you don't think that he's the right person.
Absolutely. Well, I think I should just start by saying that I'm anti-monarchy, I'm anti-mullah, and I'm anti-war. So we can just establish that. And as far as the monarchy, I think in 2026, clinging to monarchy is just not a progressive way of thought. I mean, why don't we just go back to feudalism or the caste system while we're at it? So I think in 2026, a democracy is really the way to go, especially for the people in Iran that haven't experienced that. And they've been under monarchy, under the Shah, and that didn't work out. And now they're under this oppressive regime. That's not working out either. So why don't we try something new?
Well, I would say, Pattie, that I think none of us are for war. I don't think anyone wants war because the casualties are always the people that we're trying to protect.
Sure.
But what I do think the real question is whether we're refusing to confront this regime automatically leads to peace. And I don't think that has happened. Now, Reza Pahlavi has been the lead voice where people inside Iran are chanting his name because he's a symbol of democracy. And I think what people are looking for is democracy in Iran, and he is really just more of a cultural symbol about that.
And I agree, and I understand what you're saying. I think that one thing we have to understand that people are chanting his name because they're desperate and they want change. They were chanting Khomeini's name too, and we see how that turned out. So it's out of desperation, and I think that the Iranian people should definitely choose who is their leader. But I also think that in order to be a leader of anything, you have to show that you have a proven track record of leadership, leading a group of people to a certain goal. And Reza Pahlavi has lived in the United States for the past 47 years. And in those 47 years, he's never had a job. All the money he has, he's never started a business. He's really never done anything to show that he has leadership skills to run a country. So just by that fact alone, I don't feel that he's qualified.
So I want to touch on the monarchy aspect for a second. I think that rather than viewing monarchy automatically as an archaic, outdated system of government, it isn't for everybody, nor am I saying it is for the Iranian people. It's for them to decide what it's going to be. But a constitutional monarchy where the monarch's power is checked and is really symbolic, is more of a symbolic head of state rather than a head of government, one that represents continuity, one that is above politics, that is above, let's say, class and ethnic and tribal culture, one that is somebody that the nation can rally around and say, in spite of what our leaders may or may not be doing, here's a person who is there to basically elevate and project nationhood rather than actual political ideology or will. And I think we've seen successes in that area. You look at United Kingdom, you look at other countries in Europe that have a constitutional monarchy where the monarchy is limited, where power is vested in a democratically elected parliament with an independent judiciary. These are all things I think we want to see. So as much as monarchy can be besmirched and dismissed as a cultural relic, I think that the idea is that it would provide somebody, a figure, that is above politics and that is resistant to the shifting political trends. And we've seen in this country and we've seen other democracies. So that's sort of one element I think is something to keep in mind. Monarchy doesn't have to be someone sitting on a throne with a scepter issuing decrees. It can be a lot of things in this day and age.
And I think the other issue, too, is that there have been so many political leaders who have emerged in Iran who are dead and in prison, right?
Correct. There are many leaders in Iran that should really be considered. I mean, you have Narges Mohammadi, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2023, right? And she's in Evin prison right now for her work and her humanitarian work. You have Nasrin Sotoudeh, who is a human rights activist. You have Mousavi, who is the head of the Green Movement, right? He's still in Iran. Mostafa Tajzadeh, who is a political activist in Evin prison. So there are so many people that have literally given their lives to free the people of Iran. And I think it's a disrespect to not even consider them and just directly go to Reza Pahlavi when he really has not given his life like these people have who are currently in prison.
I do think, though, that the exiled crown prince for the past 47 years has been saying the same message about bringing democracy to Iran. It's just now people are listening and hearing him, especially outside of the Iranian community. But I also do believe that he and his team do have a plan, because when this regime does fall and topples, there's going to be chaos. And he's going to bring organized chaos to Iran. So he already has an Iran Prosperity Project in place where he has the right people in mind, some of them that you mentioned, to help bring Iran to the forefront of democracy. So we don't have a devastating regime come into play once this one has toppled.
One of the issues revolutionary movements have, and let's be honest, this is the aspirations for many, is that there needs to be a figure, a central leadership, someone they can rally behind. Yeah. We saw that in '79. Reza Pahlavi may or may not be that person. He should not be entitled to that role. Correct. He should earn that role. Absolutely. Anybody who does. The issue then becomes is if we go sort of searching for who could fill that slot, all the while preventing Iranians who are disenchanted with the government now from being able to mobilize and rally. And the absence of a leader or a figurehead can undermine any movements for social change. I mean, that's why Mousavi, who you mentioned, was such a threat. That's why he's been under house arrest. That's why former President Khatibi, Khatibi, all these others who were seen as figures who could have that role have all been marginalized. The issue is when you're dealing with an Islamic Republic that imprisons and oppresses potential leaders in the country, are we then, if you're an Iranian and you say, are Iranians then forced to look outside the country for somebody who has a platform, he or she, to be the one to do that? That becomes a challenge, because it's hard to be an emerging leader in a country that will imprison you so easily.
And he has said that he wants to be a transitional figure.
Exactly.
I guess that remains to be seen if he even steps into that role.
Right. I mean, he says that he wants to be a transitional figure, and I hope that's true, but he had also talked about that he is creating an imperial air force. So if you're creating an imperial air force, that's directly towards a monarchy and not a transitional figure. So I don't know which one it is.
You mentioned when the monarchy, or when the regime falls, do you think this effort will be successful? I mean, we have news events of this past week where President Trump said that he is negotiating. He's putting pressure on the Iranian regime to negotiate. They're refusing. We have the son of the former leader who is now ostensibly the new leader of Iran. You think this will be a successful, it will be done in a couple weeks and it will be successful?
I think that it'll be up to the Iranian people in Iran. I think what President Trump and Netanyahu are putting in place is they're trying to lay the groundwork so it'll be ready for the Iranian people to go in and then take over and choose who their leader is and what type of government they're looking for having.
I think it's very idealistic to think that the people are even able to take over. The people are not armed and they really don't have the means to take over. So unless the United States goes in and really affects a regime change, this has been for nothing. Because I don't believe in people dying for just oil or for anything else unless there's a regime change and they're actually going to be free. And it doesn't seem like that's going to happen now.
I do think it's a two-part war, though. The first part is the U.S. and Israel going in, and the second part will be the Iranian people finishing it up and deciding how they want to have their government lead.
The issue that comes up is how Israel and the United States conduct this war without putting the Iranian people at too much of a risk. I mean, yes, on the one hand, the idea is to take out elements of the regime, the security apparatus, all of the functions, the tools the state uses to oppress people, right? That will enable them to rise up. At the same time, you're seeing civilian areas bombed. You're seeing threats by the president to bomb infrastructure, things of that nature. So I think the issue becomes finding the line where an attempt to open the pathway for a popular uprising is lost, and instead you end up setting back the cause of popular movements because you're attacking civilian targets and risking and endangering civilian lives. So I think that is something that is, my concern as I'm watching this escalate even more and more. I mean, the remarks from the president on Wednesday night about basically bombing Iran back to the Stone Age, what does that entail, right? That takes us into civilian territory. That takes us into destruction of infrastructure, things that the people will need to rebuild if and when that day comes when they get a chance to do that. This is an example of a leadership, and I'm going to push back a little bit, having the end goal in mind without having the process secured. And I think we're seeing now the consequences of that. And I think we can admire the end goal, but to not have the process worked out or determined ahead of time gives us, I think, the dysfunction that we're seeing now.
And does it risk undermining the goal and the support of people in Iran? I want to read you what the UN humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher said. You don't hit civilian infrastructure. That includes hospitals. You don't hit schools, energy sources, bridges. That is a war crime. That is absolutely clear in international law. We have the girls' school that was hit right off the bat. We have the quote about bombing Iran back to the Stone Ages. We have the water source being threatened. What do you make of that?
You know, what I look at is the last 47 years, right? The 47 years we've had, by us turning a blind eye to what has been going on in Iran, we have had thousands of body bags that have been uncounted for, correct? So unfortunately, again, when you go to war, there is a casualty. You are directly affecting the people that you're trying to protect. It is a casualty of war. But again, looking at the body bags that are going to be uncounted for, if we keep this regime in place, it's going to be greater.
If I may say something about that, I don't know why Iran is different than any other country that is an oppressive regime. I mean, if you want to talk about us being at war with countries, we've literally been at war with North Korea for the past 76 years. North Korea invaded South Korea and they never signed a peace treaty. And in these 76 years, North Korea has been as repressive as Iran against their people. They have shot down our helicopters. They have seized our naval ships and took Americans hostage. They provide cyber attacks over and over again on us and on US. They hacked Ethereum and stole $1.5 million to back their nuclear wars. And they currently have nuclear warheads now that can reach the United States, and Iran doesn't. So why are we fighting a war in Iran and not North Korea?
Pattie, you just answered that. Sorry to interrupt you. You just answered your question. We're not fighting a war with North Korea because North Korea has a nuclear deterrent. The goal is to prevent Iran from becoming a country that cannot be confronted.
So if that is the goal,
right.
Then why did we get out of the nuclear deal? The reason that people didn't like the nuclear deal is because they said that it had a sunset clause, that eventually in 15 years, Iran was going to have nuclear weapons. But Donald Trump thought it was a better idea to get out of a deal, to not have any deal at all, than to have a deal in place where you actually had inspectors going into Iran to inspect the nuclear facilities. And in these 8 years, the enrichment of uranium in Iran has exponentially increased since that deal hasn't been in place. So if that's the goal, right, you don't get out of a deal like that.
So two things can be true at once. The deal was a bad deal. Right. Getting out of the deal without an alternative ready
Absolutely.
to go is equally bad. I think the other aspects of the deal came up short, and we're seeing the consequences of that now. The ballistic missile program. There was nothing in the deal that would curb Iran's ballistic missile construction. Iran was building ballistic missiles capable of carrying a nuclear payload. Granted, they didn't have a nuclear weapon that could fit into the actual missile, but why are they building a missile capable of carrying a nuclear payload if their goal was not a nuclear weapon? And number two, their support for proxy groups. I mean, no one in this room needs to be told about the impact those proxy groups have had in destabilizing the Middle East, not just U.S. interests, but U.S. allies. We saw what happened in October 7, 2023 with Hamas. Goes on and on and on. These are destabilizing groups, and Iran is committed to their funding and sustaining them. So the Iran deal didn't address that. And I think from President Trump's perspective, rightfully, he saw shortcomings in the deal because it failed to address those areas. But again, I agree. Getting rid of a deal that at least provided some minimal curbs or some restrictions and not having anything to go right in its place created a missed opportunity and probably created a new set of problems while addressing another set of issues. But that ultimately is the reason why North Korea doesn't work as an example, because North Korea is now a deterrent, as a nuclear deterrent. And that's what we're trying to avoid with Iran.
Yes, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No.
You were talking about the proxy groups. The war by proxy has occurred throughout the world, and in fact, U.S. engages that all the time. We back the Saudis against Yemen. We back the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. So we do that all the time. And the proxy groups that Iran supports are proxy groups that are fighting against Israel, and Israel wants Iran to be a parking lot. That's literally what Israel would like for Iran. So if Iran is funding proxy groups, it's because the proxy groups are working for their interests against Israel. It's not just against the United States.
Except the issue with the go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was going to say the proxy, but they're saying death to America, which is a big difference, and they want to wipe us and Israel off the map. That's the problem with these proxy groups. And we'll go on and on.
Well, the other issue with the proxy groups is that they claim Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad,
right.
They claim to be supporting the Palestinians. Nothing has set the Palestinian statehood cause back more than the involvement of these Iranian-backed so-called Palestinian nationalist groups, whose interests are not in Palestinian statehood, but is a sort of a broader, Islamic system to take place. And this is exactly what Iran has. This is, I think, in the interest of no Palestinian and no Arab states in the region want to see a beachhead of Iranian religious fervor right there in the middle of the Holy Land. So their proxy groups is not equivalent to what the U.S. does with Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is a nation state. When they go to fight against Yemen, their fighter jets are marked as Saudi jets. Their soldiers are wearing uniform.
We didn't support
that? Oh, no,
that?
we did support that. But what I'm saying, it's one thing to say that you're supporting an ally who's acting as your proxy. It's another thing when you're talking about non-state actors that are designated as terrorists by not just the United States, but also by the EU. That's what Iran is meddling in. So it's a false, I think, equivalence to compare it to the U.S. and Saudi relationship. Now, you mentioned the Mujahideen of 79. Absolutely. That was 79. Right. And I think in hindsight, the U.S. can acknowledge that was absolutely short-sighted. Granted, that was a Cold War.
What about in Syria?
Yeah.
Syria, again, you're dealing with a civil war. You're dealing with a sort of illegitimate regime in the Assad regime that itself was a proxy of Russia by many.
What about in Nicaragua?
Absolutely.
When we supported the rebels in Nicaragua who were hanging priests and were executing people on the street, we supported that all day long.
Absolutely. My point is that those wrongs committed by the U.S. in its foreign policy in the 80s and the 70s, I think, should not carry over into what should or shouldn't be done today when we're dealing with recognized sponsors of state terrorism and terrorist groups.
Well, we have to wrap up, and we only have about a minute left. But I do want to ask, why do you think that there is so little support among the U.S. public for this military action?
I personally think there is quite a bit of support by the U.S. Community. Everyone I've spoken to who have engaged, they understand what we're trying to do. It's a national security interest for us, and that's the most important. What affects us around the world affects us here. So that's why we can't turn a blind eye to it. End of the day, Americans are also very generous. We're very philanthropic people. We're very humanitarian people. So we want to see freedom, we want to see peace, and we want to see human dignity around the world.
I mean, if you're talking about support for the war, the National Iranian-American Council just came out with a survey that they did. And 66% of Iranians in diaspora and in the United States are opposed to the war. There's 32% that are for the war, and then the remainder just didn't want to answer. So that was a study and a poll that just came out yesterday.
NIAC is not the most objective source,
Exactly.
with all due respect. I'm just saying, so NIAC definitely has...
NIAC is a mouthpiece?
I don't know if I want to call it a mouthpiece, but there have been links
regime.
between NIAC and the Islamic Republic. That being said, this president has not done a good job of making the case for war. He won't even call it a war unless he calls it a war by accident, which he did yesterday. He hasn't made the case for it. He hasn't sold it to the public. Whatever good reasons you might or any of us might think are there, it's something that in a democratic system has to be articulated. He has not done that, and until he does that, that's going to explain in part why you see, I think, a growing lack of support for the war, and something that this administration and the party in general, the Republican Party, if it's concerned about the midterms, needs to look at going forward.
All right. Well, we appreciate all of your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Benjamin, Parmis, and Pattie, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, President Trump says the U.S. objectives will be achieved in a matter of weeks, and we will, of course, be watching, and we will continue the discussion. Thank you for joining us.